I think it is, first of all, very important to define the meaning of this concept because, if we discuss an important topic, we should really be on the same page and have the same kind of definition. Often this is not really clearly defined. I think it's important to realize that sustainability is really about the long-term success, if you want, ability of a system, of a community to survive and actually do well in the long run without negative feedbacks that sort of push it off the right course. Now, of course, often we are talking about sustainability in the context of the economy, because the discourse, public discourse, policy discourse has been framed by economic policies, which includes, government policies, tax policies, various types of regulatory policies. And in this context, sustainability also needs to be considered. And in particular, we need to think about the relationship between sustainability and the economy and economic growth. It's something we should talk about. But just to recap, so in general, the definition of sustainability should be this ability of a system, of an organization, of a group of people, of a community, which can be a local community or often will be a nation because we have policies on a national level, to do well, to thrive in the long run without negative feedback loops. Well, so if we talk about the community as being the nation, then of course we have a number of challenges that can make this community unsustainable. In many countries, that's something very basic, because a community, a nation consists of people. And if the number of people declines, then already you have a problem, maybe of sustainability. So in a number of countries, falling fertility is a problem. Sustainability, of course, is commonly connected to the environment and nature, and it's necessary, of course, to realize that we need to have a system whereby nature is not hurt, is not damaged, is not depleted. Often it is said that, economic activity is bad as such because it will always hurt nature and we should stop having economic growth. That actually is not true. It's not accurate to say that growth is always bad for the environment, for nature, and is therefore unsustainable. There is not a contradiction between economic growth and sustainability, environmental sustainability. In other words, we can have fairly high economic growth that is sustainable, that is possible, but there may be challenges. And of course, challenges include the need to be environmentally sustainable and therefore not to harm the environment. But it's important to realize that even when we have zero growth, we can still damage the environment. There can still be pollution. And that proves the point that it's not growth, economic growth per se, that harms the environment. It is bad activities such as pollution that harm the environment. And they can happen with little growth or with a lot of growth. And the consequence is that we can have high economic growth if the emphasis is right, if the priorities are right, and we make sure it is environmentally sustainable, and that can be done. Yes, I think it's not true to say that there is a conflict between economic growth and sustainability. Growth is actually is an illusion. Economic growth is a statistical illusion that we have created. Statisticians, economists have created a definition of what is the economy and therefore what is economic growth. But if you ask a physicist, in terms of physics, say energy, what is economic growth? A physicist will tell you, well, there is no growth. Look at the laws of thermodynamics. It's a closed system. What do you mean growth? We have the energy of the sun coming in. We have some stored energy from the sun of the past. But what is economic growth? Economic growth was created when the financial sector and the government sector decided we want a measure of economic activity for our particular purposes. And then particular data series were taken, and the concept of gross national product, gross domestic product were created. So the good news is, in reality, there is no economic growth, as we know from physics. And that also proves that, of course, economic growth per se can't be a problem that is harming the environment, because there is no growth. What we have is statistical indicators of something that we call economic activity. And we can set priorities, and we can ensure that that economic activity is environmentally friendly, environmentally sustainable, even environmentally enhancing. Yes, absolutely. That is possible. We've got examples of high achieving countries, essentially high growth systems, high performance systems. And these high performance systems in the past often did not place the emphasis on sustainability. And I'm talking about Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, that all achieved double-digit economic growth over several decades. Now, we said it's a statistical concept, and when you have double-digit economic growth, you will double national income every 4 or 5 years. And so this is quite an extraordinary achievement. The goal at the time was to maximize that statistical concept of GDP and have GDP growth at a very high level. But it's very easy to switch the dial a little bit and ensure that we get sustainable and high economic growth. When we have an economic structure, an economic system with the right incentive structures that deliver this sustainable high economic growth. I think it is possible also for high performance economies such as China's economy to ensure that economic activity will be sustainable. Of course, we know that CO2 emissions are high when you're such a large economy and you're growing at such a high pace, and you have a traditional economic system. But actually, China has moved very rapidly towards shifting its economic system. It has reduced the importance of fossil fuels in a number of sectors. Just looking at cars, the introduction of electric cars is actually has been accelerated dramatically in China. And so there's a number of initiatives that have been already taken. But I think in general, if we think about this question, then it is just a question of priority. And China is a good example where if you switch the priorities and suddenly sustainability becomes important, you will immediately see policy results and actual results. And so China has done a lot of measures on this front, and no doubt we'll see further measures. One can, of course, also in the Western economies where economic growth is lower, I think one can increase economic growth rapidly while ensuring that there is no damage to the environment. And when you do that, for example, financial institutions can stimulate activity by lending for sustainable economic activity in the green economy sectors, you will create more jobs, you will create more wealth in the green economy, which will also deliver GDP. And therefore, this demonstrates that you can have high economic growth and at the same time ensure sustainability. That's a very interesting and quite an important question, actually. How did our measures of national income, gross national product, gross domestic product, how did these measures come about? It sort of happened 100 years ago when the system of national income accounts was developed. And clearly there was a policy goal, a policy need by the governments to have a better measure of what's going on in the economy. But at the same time, it's my view and my research shows that the financial sector played a role in this. Because in particularly when big banks were lending to other countries, they were in need of a measure of the ability to service those loans, which essentially is lending to governments, sovereign lending, or if this country then is issuing government bonds. The question is, what is the right coupon? What should be the yield on these bonds? What is the highest interest rate you can charge lending to a country? Well, this question requires then a measure of the ability to service loans. And the ability to service loans can be measured by certain types of economic activity, such as the measures that we have, GDP and national income. So I think that is the real origin of GDP. And so really it's a measure of the ability to service debt. And that's a particular purpose, but it doesn't mean that this is actually the best measure of social and economic activity in the country. And that's why, of course, we can improve on the measures that we have so far. But as I said earlier, also it does mean that just having high GDP growth is not a bad thing, as some critics are saying. It does not mean we must damage the environment. We can have environmentally friendly and environmentally enhancing economic growth. I think the emphasis has to be on every person to ensure that they don't damage the environment. Environmentally damaging activity can happen by anyone at any time. And therefore, I think we need to devolve the responsibility. Everyone has to be responsible in their actions. And governments have to ensure that they don't have the wrong incentives in the tax system or in government regulation that could accidentally encourage certain wasteful or harmful activity. And if we do that, then we can minimize environmentally unsustainable activities. But there's another response to this, a more concrete response to your question, namely, if we compare different economic systems, and over time, of course, there is a tendency in economic systems to become more centralized, and big business, big companies becoming more dominant. And if we compare an economy where we have large companies and a concentration of activity and decision-making in a small number of large businesses, small number of large banks, and so on. That's one type of economy. The other economy is a very decentralized economy, which is more local, where you've got many small companies, small banks, small firms, SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. If you compare these two types of economies, you will find that the more concentrated economy tends to be much more harmful to the environment. And the more decentralized economy, because it brings the decision-making down to the level of individuals, small companies, where people have an impact, local decision making, local governments, it is easier to be sustainable and environmentally friendly when you have a decentralized system and you ensure you've got healthy local economies with many small financial institutions that lend to small firms locally. Whereas centralized systems start to become out of control, when you have these global giants that make decisions. Nobody knows about what these decisions are. They're not really accountable to anyone. Whereas if it's a decentralized system with any small firms, there is local accountability and true accountability. So that's another important dimension, the centralization versus decentralization. And I believe that the centralized systems are less sustainable and more decentralized systems are more sustainable, and it's easier to ensure sustainability in environmentally enhancing activities.